I've been working at the Kinsey Institute for almost 8 years now. And by training, I'm a social and developmental psychologist. So I specialize in how couples impact one another through their interactions. And I've sort of adapted that to look at how people generally affect one another, whether or not they're in an established relationship or connecting with someone maybe online that you don't have that label for, but is still an intimate connection. A lot of my work focuses on how technology is a tool for that kind of important connection that people really need to thrive in their lives.
So speaking of studying and research, you actually conducted a study involving LiveJasmin. Is that right?
We've actually conducted 2 studies now. The first one was a survey of Americans in general. So it wasn't, we didn't survey models or clients, but we surveyed a nationally representative sample of Americans, so 8,000 people. And we were really interested in the prevalence of people who are using the internet for specifically sexual intimacy, but also looking at sexual intimacy as kind of a foot in the door to other forms of intimacy or to a more than sexual connection. And so in that first study, we wanted to see how common it is for people to be going to these websites and what kinds of personality or background characteristics that correlated with. So who is most likely to be seeking out these spaces and what are they getting out of that? And then in the next year, we did a study where we surveyed clients on the website and we surveyed performers or models on the website. So we got 2,000 clients and about 500 models, and we asked both sides of that equation about their interactions with the other, what kinds of effects that those interactions have on them in their outside the platform life. What's underneath beyond what we, I think, sort of instantly classify that website or those kinds of websites as, there's certainly explicitly sexual spaces, right? Like the advertising and the overall draw is specifically for sexual gratification or fulfilling your sexual needs. And those are very important and certainly have a lot of positive impacts on both mental and physical health. But that doesn't mean that that's the only thing going on there. And especially when there are live people interacting with one another, there's a lot of opportunity for more than just that sexual connection. And so that's what we were really interested in when we surveyed our clients and performers in those surveys that we did. And we found quite a bit of evidence for beyond, for going to the website or being drawn to the website and to the models for reasons beyond the sexual release.
First and foremost, you're the perfect person to be talking to about this because you are an expert in human connection and you've been conducting these studies and researching these topics. And that leads me to my question of, you said you found evidence that clients or members are going to this website or platforms like Jasmin for deeper reasons other than the sexuality. Would it be fair to say that the sexuality is almost the surface level reason, and maybe even the larger reason is deeper than that?
Yeah, I think so. So in our study of the 2,000 clients or the customers on the website, we asked them several questions, but 2 of the questions that we were really interested in having them express in their own words. So we actually gave them an open text box and just let them lay it out exactly as they would word it. But we asked them, what is your ideal CAM model here? Like if you got to sort or select by any characteristic, what are you looking for? What would be your ideal person to find on here? And then the second question was, if you had to explain what this relationship is with the CAM models that you visit on this website to someone else who's never been here, how would you explain that? And so what we did was we took those 2,000 responses and we did some qualitative content coding. So we did analyses on those to look at themes that came out. And so, of course, you would expect that when we ask people what is your ideal model, your ideal cam performer? Generally, you would expect that they would say things like physical characteristics, like large breasts, or maybe they want someone who's just really open to doing whatever the customer wants, or someone who's really kinky or something like that, right? These very clearly sex characteristics or traits. And what we actually found was less than half of the respondents said any of that. Less than half of them said anything about appearance or physical characteristics at all. Certainly there were many people who said things like, I would like a blonde or a brunette, or, this size or something, but it was less than half of the sample, and an equal number of people reported personality characteristics rather than physical. So a lot of our participants, who were mostly men, a lot of our men reported that they wanted a good listener. They wanted someone who made them feel like they could be comfortable to express things that have been bothering them in their daily life, or that they feel like they can't talk about with anyone other than, this person in this very private, very, secure space that can be very encapsulated and ended. It just stays in that one space and doesn't go anywhere else. The person on the other side doesn't know anyone that so they can't tell. So yeah, it does seem that not participants, that clients are really drawn to the non-sexual or the emotional, the connective sort of aspect, potentially equally to the sexual aspect. At least that's what we found in our coding. And then for the second question, where we asked them how they would describe this relationship to someone who'd never been to a campsite, we again coded these for, sexual descriptors, like, there were some people who described it like, oh, it's like, hiring a sex worker, but instead of being in person, they're on the screen, right? But more people described it as a friendship, or some people certainly described it as like kind of a not temporary, but like an on and off girlfriend kind of situation that you can visit when you want to. A lot of the descriptions had certainly levels of intimacy in them that were beyond sexual. So a lot of the men described, being able to go and meet with this woman who just has great conversation, and you two bond over, the things that you've been needing to say and talk about. And it really does seem like that's a huge draw. The sexual element seems to be the first draw, but it's also what makes it safe almost, right? So especially for men who constantly have to struggle with the idea of upholding masculinity and, not showing weakness and things like that, the idea of maybe typical therapy or even apps like Headspace and things like that, even if, they're free, or even if you have the resources to afford them and the time to go and see them, there's still some stigma or just a barrier to entry for those sorts of things that really put off a lot of people who could otherwise benefit. So and especially, we know that women are much more likely to go to therapy, much more likely to seek out healthcare in general and do self-care and things like that. And I think that a good bit of that has to do with these societal expectations for men, right? You need to be strong. You don't need to show weakness. And also the idea of the sexual being that very much aligns with, high masculinity and being the man. And so I think that these websites like LiveJasmin, these websites that give people the ability to connect one-on-one with a person who will have that time with you, who certainly paid, but will carve out that specific time to connect with just you, I think is certainly, if not the major appeal, one of the two major appeals of those kinds of websites. And it definitely does seem to be that a big draw for a lot of people.
From what I heard, it sounded like the participants that you drew from that were members, they basically told you that their experience of this is that it's a safe place.
Yeah. Yeah, essentially that's basically what we found, and it actually aligns really well with what we found in that first study that I told you about that had the 8,000 people, the sample of just Americans, not people on the website. We did a study looking at that data, and it actually just got published towards the end of last year of 2021, where we looked at sex tech in general. So that included campsites, but it also included any way that you use technology to to seek sexual pleasure or to seek out that sexual gratification. And what we were really interested in was to see the sort of mental health connection with that. So if the idea is that these are, these safe spaces where people can carve out, this little area, this little private area of the internet where they feel comfortable disclosing and being open and vulnerable, it's possible that this is also, being some sort of positive impact on people's mental health. Higher levels of both anxiety and depression were associated with more use. And so people who are struggling with that anxiety or struggling with feelings of depression are being drawn more to these spaces. And looking at our results in combination with past research that other people have done, like in terms of actual sex behavior and looking at hormones and physiological changes, our thought is that by engaging with these sexual spaces, like going to campsites and engaging with the performers, it's actually providing a temporary relief of those symptoms, because sexual gratification, sexual interaction, and intimate interaction in general, these feelings of bonding and things like that, release neurotransmitters, they release hormones that do provide a sense of calm and comfort, at least temporarily. And so based on that work, we were really sort of convinced that these spaces are in some way serving as like a safe space. And that's what led into our survey of the clients to see if that's really how they were describing it. I do think that there is at least some building evidence that those kinds of interactions do provide feelings of emotional intimacy and closeness, which we know from lots of prior work is associated with better mental well-being overall. So less depressive symptoms, less anxiety, better body image, more likely to get on exercise and eat well and things like that. So yeah, so that's what I would say to that question.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking, if a guy is going through something, we'll use a man as the example here. If he's going through something and then he makes this connection online, that might be a confidence boost for him. And he might say, you know what, I am going to eat a little bit better this week. I want to look good for so-and-so.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's probably happening for a lot of men in those situations. And my team here, we've also been interested in how that might translate to benefits in the real world, like in their interactions with other people after they're done interacting with the model. And one of the researchers on my team has a PhD in communication science. So she's really interested in how men interacting with these performers or these models, whether or not that helps them build communication skills that they can then take on to real life relationships with women that they might want to pursue to date or what have you. And she's looked at specifically the work that the data that we collected from clients. And that work does show that for clients who feel like they've had an emotional connection with a model, they do also report having better communication skills following that interaction, better communication skills that they feel like they've used in their real life.
I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier that I thought was really interesting and a really good point, in that, especially for men, there are certain barriers for them in doing things that could be healthy for them, like therapy. There's a lot of stigma. Men are like, no, it's easier for a woman, I think, to be like, oh, I need to have a session or have some therapy. I know myself, I've had therapy before, and honestly, it felt just like venting, which was really nice, just venting to someone who doesn't know anyone I know, who's not biased. And you mentioned how they are there are aspects of therapy that they're able to get with these models, in the sense that they can vent, they can just share what they're experiencing or going through with someone that is non-biased, doesn't know anyone that they know, and, is in essence being paid to kind of be there and listen and support them, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the same thing to me as the therapy session I had. You know what I mean?
Yeah, take out the sex element and yeah, right?
It's kind of like an easier way for men to get those aspects of therapy without it having that stigma attached. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that men often feel like they can't communicate those feelings or be vulnerable, even with their in-person partners, even if they've been together for a long time. And that's because we don't socialize men like we socialize women. We don't teach them as they grow up how to express feelings, or that it's okay to cry, or how to have those conversations where you tell people, how that made you feel, and how to go forward from there. And so I think that there are just so many barriers piled up for men, like the need to be masculine at all times, the need to never be weak, the idea that you aren't supposed to ever show emotions, so now you have no idea how to even begin to do that. So I think that there are a lot of barriers that, by having a platform or a website they can go to that actually has nothing to do with that, it inadvertently really serves that purpose for them. And I think that that's one certainly unexpected, but very important and valuable part of those platforms.
I went through and read some of the research that you sent me. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And you stated that actually non-sexual conversation was associated with more time and bigger rewards for the models than sexual conversation. And I wanted to know your thoughts on why you think that is, and just to talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So we worked with a person who works at LiveJasmin, and he worked to analyze the chat conversations between models and clients over the period of, I think, a year. So they're all anonymized. We can't connect them to anyone, but we were able to pull chats and use a computer program to analyze them in terms of content and words used, and how those map onto like subjects they talked about. And what we found was that certainly sexual talk and sexual behavior is a big part of the website, and it's certainly a big part of the beginning of the interaction, right? So if you're going to have sexual topics or sexual interactions with the model, it's probably going to be relatively soon after you get into that interaction with them. But what we also see from that text is that people, the longer they stay on or the more money they spend, the more time they spend talking about non-sexual topics. And so while sexual fulfillment and sexual behavior, sexual connection does, build connection, and it does bring clients back to that same performer and fulfills needs, certainly, it does seem like, at least in this platform in particular, the more emotional component, or the like vulnerability component, does seem to be more valuable for the clientele.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like that really is fascinating.
I agree.
Another part of your research I saw that I thought was really interesting was that people who are coupled but not feeling fulfilled in their partnership are opening more up to platforms like Jasmin in order to get some of that variety or some of that fulfillment that, one person can't fulfill every single need. And so platforms like Jasmin, it's less threatening.
The ability to satisfy your partner's every need has become just more and more difficult over time. And studies do show that satisfaction within marriages has declined over the last few decades. And some people argue or posit that the reason is that now we want more out of our partners. So our generations past, like our grandparents' time or great grandparents' time, they likely, found a partner and got married because that person lived down the street and they had a big farm, and you knew that you would be set for food for the winter, and that sort of thing. Like, you married for more utilitarian reasons rather than the reasons that we pursue relationships now, which are more like, we need someone to fulfill our like emotional belongingness needs. We want to feel like we're part of something. We want someone to help build us up. We want to feel validated. We want all of those psychological benefits of a relationship, in addition to the great sex partner and the person who's always there for us and the person who goes and gets groceries and takes us to appointments and all of that stuff. And so, of course, it's exhausting for any one person. And I think that has certainly become noticeable in our culture, with more increasing interest in things like consensual non-monogamy, or open relationships and things like that. As those sort of rise a bit in prevalence, I think that also adds the evidence to the idea that, one person just really can't do it anymore, at least for a lot of relationships. And so we've been looking at turning to campsites as a way to help fulfill those needs that are otherwise going unmet in a relationship with one partner. It seems like these sites are sort of functioning for some people as kind of a possibly less threatening alternative to monogamy than having another in-person partner.
I have to agree with you. I have noticed a trend in our culture and our generation of kind of abandoning true, like full and total monogamy. The open relationship idea, polyamory, is definitely on the rise. I have certainly noticed it. I feel like many of us have either considered it or talked about it with partners. And so when I saw your message about this part of the research, that really was fascinating to me, because I can see very clearly how this is a less threatening way to add in some of that variety. There's a relationship expert I love. She's like 90 years old and she's been doing it for years. Her name's Pat Allen, Dr. Pat Allen. Sure. And she said, we all actually do need variety. None of us are truly, human beings are not actually truly monogamous, but like you mentioned earlier, we kind of have chosen to be for survival reasons. Like, okay, we need this partnership so we can survive. But life has evolved beyond that now. And so sometimes people need variety. And this is, I agree that this is a much less threatening way to invite that into a relationship. So
yeah, and monogamy certainly works for a lot of people, but I think that we as a culture are slowly learning that it is not the universal relationship setup
that we thought it was. Yeah. I'm curious, it sounds like you've been working on this research for a few years. Is there any part of the research that you personally just found really surprising or interesting that stood out to you?
The idea that less than half of clients had named any kind of physical or sexual component of their ideal model was pretty surprising, especially considering the reliance on physical attractiveness in any kind of like sexual material, right? So obviously the point or the draw is that you get to pick your model, you get to pick what they look like, you get to pick your type or your fantasy or whatever. And so you would think that that is the draw, that's the main thing, but less than half of people even wrote anything about that when they were talking about what kind of model they would really want to talk to. And I think that's really important also because a lot of clients do make repeated visits, and they make repeated visits to the same person. And so they really are building an intimate relationship, even though it's, commodified. It has a financial element, and it also has physical distance with the computer, but it's really not inhibiting that intimacy in the way that we would expect. And so that I think is so interesting, so cool, and really gives a little bit of hope, I think, for where we might be in the near future in terms of moving away from this idea that technology is scary and replacing our ability to connect with people, and more into thinking about it as a tool that can really go a lot of different ways, but in a lot of different good, beneficial ways. So I'm hoping that we can eventually use our work to move us there.
Yeah. You mentioned, moving forward and people being scared. I saw that you guys had a comment about the fact that there's actually not a lot of literature on webcamming. It's relatively small still at this point.
Yeah.
Why? Why is that? Why are we so afraid to go here?
We, as I think a world, or at least as a American society, we have this idea that true intimacy or true love or true feelings can't be bought. And the idea that people would be paying for that sort of thing is just psychologically uncomfortable for a lot of people because of that, I think. And so certainly a lot of scientists and people in general have turned away from or shied away from studying these areas.
As you were talking, I was thinking, is it the connection that's being bought, or is it a mutual exchange? Like it's just how you look at it. Because obviously the models, they want support financially for their life, and the members want support emotionally, intimately, sexually. It depends. It sounds though like it's really about the connection at the most basic and fundamental level.
Yeah.
And so there's an exchange here where, hey, I'm going to support you financially, and hey, I'm going to support you emotionally.
Think about like where we were pre-pandemic versus in the first year. Do you remember how OnlyFans exploded? Like everyone had an OnlyFans, right? After like 6 months of lockdown. And I mean, that sort of became the weirdly like the norm online for a long time. Like everybody had an OnlyFans. It was like the link in the bio of everyone's Instagram. And I thought that was really interesting to see because there was a period where everyone was suffering and feeling very lonely and isolated and disconnected. And then one of the sort of big responses to that was this very sexual happening, this sexual response, and it seemed to be relatively accepted. And I also think that things like the rising memberships on online dating sites or on LiveJasmin, things like that, really just demonstrate our drive, our constant need for that intimacy with another person. And so I think that as we continue to get more and more technologically heavy as a society, I think that we are kind of inevitably moving to that point. I mean, sex is sort of synonymous with the internet now. And so I think that we'll see a bit more openness, I think, on a larger scale.
You brought up this really interesting point of when the pandemic started, we had this boom of these platforms, Jasmine, online dating, and platforms like Jasmine, just this huge boom. And I have this theory. I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Okay.
Because to me, I have this theory that our like most fundamental need as human beings, I'm talking beyond food and water, is connection. And I was thinking, do any of us truly love money? Like, yes, we love that it pays rent. Yes, we love that it gives freedom. Yes, we love that it buys food, but do we actually like genuinely like that green piece of paper? We don't really care about it. It's what it brings, right?
Right.
And I feel like sex and sexuality is almost similar in that the sexuality, it's bringing us intimacy, it's bringing us connection. That's actually what we really want and need from it. Not necessarily the naked photos. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the like, yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Oh, I definitely agree. And some other colleagues here and I did a study a few years ago, not with LiveJasmin clients or anything, but we did this study looking at people who engage in hookups, like one night stands or, sex without emotional components. And we looked at their more intimate behaviors, and in terms of like, did they want to hold hands or cuddle or spend the night or gaze into each other's eyes and say like compliments and niceties and things that you would typically expect with romance. And it turns out most people do want that, even in their hookups. They want that cuddling, they want that lovey, intimate feeling. And that's certainly not what we think of when we think of the hookup or the one night stand. It's not what's shown on TV or in any kind of TV, any show or movie, but it's there. The sex is bringing the intimacy, I think. And I think that was a good way to say it.
To me, it just comes down to that basic human need of love or connection. Like it's just what we need. And it can look very different, which leads me to my next question, which is, especially during this crazy time of the pandemic, which none of us saw coming, but there is a lot more isolation. Why, from your opinion and perspective, are platforms like Jasmin so important and doing so well at this time?
Well, I think that, for all of us, this is an unprecedented event. We've not had to live through something like this. The one thing that the pandemic has done that I think is pretty rare is that it centered relationships as the site of transmission. So it made relationships themselves a threat, because that's the only way to pass the virus, right? You have to interact with other people. You have to be close enough to them to pass it. And so the pandemic made it so that now we're scared to pursue things that are sort of in our evolutionary history. People have always sought out other people for comfort and security and safety and bonding and all those things. And all of a sudden, this becomes the largest threat to you. And so I think that platforms and websites that have made it so that people can actually connect with another real human being who's there in real time are certainly, mental health savers for a lot of people, I think, especially people who are living alone or maybe living with family who aren't supportive. Like I know that a lot of people who are in the LGBTQ community have had to move back in with their family, but they're not out, right? So it's a huge struggle for them and they don't have anyone to talk to who knows the real them. And so I think a lot of platforms that let people connect to another person, even if it's someone they don't actually know in their like face-to-face life, is just hugely important for allowing us to have that intimacy, that connection, that vulnerability, and really fulfill these ingrained needs that all of us have. I think those are hugely important. And honestly, I think that even when the pandemic becomes less of a threat, I don't think that our reliance on technology is going to fade out with it. People have internet privacy concerns with like hacking and data and all that stuff, but I think that this is an example of one of those sorts of rare closed spaces that you can really enter and behave in that space in a way that will not follow you elsewhere if you don't want it to. And I think that that's really rare for a lot of us don't have anything like that. Like, unless you go to therapy or something, there's no space like that where you can really absolutely be yourself and whatever happens doesn't matter, like there are no social consequences. No one's going to stop being your friend. No one's going to stop talking to you. I think that's so rare. And I think that, I think if more people had that, it would be beneficial. Not that they need to visit the website for that, but certainly being able to express yourself and to be able to work through things that have happened and make meaning of those and, grow from those emotionally. You need to have that outlet. And so I think that in a way, this is sort of a great safe space for a lot of people.
Thank you so much for your time and this incredible interview.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the work you're doing to help educate all of us and push things forward in this space where there's not a lot of literature yet. Thank you so much.
We're working on it. Thank you. This was wonderful. Thanks for having me.